The morning the moving truck finally pulled up across the street, the entire block came outside to watch. My neighbor Carol brought coffee out to the curb. Nobody said much. We just stood on our front lawns in the quiet, the first real quiet any of us had heard in months, and we watched the loudest people I have ever lived near load up all the chaos they had dragged onto our street and haul it off somewhere else. Not one person waved. My name is Nora, 33F, and I drive a city bus for a living, which means my alarm goes off at 4:30 in the morning and my shifts run 12 hours. I live with my boyfriend, Eli, 34M, in a small rented house on a street that used to be the kind of boring you only appreciate after you lose it. For about 6 months, one single house across the road turned a whole block of people who wake up early and work hard into a group text that never stopped buzzing. This is the story of how we got our street back, and I promise you the ending is worth it, because for a long time there I did not think it was ever coming. Let me set the scene first, because the before matters. You have to know what the quiet was like to understand what they took. Before they showed up, our street was nothing special, and that was the whole point of it. It was a row of small rented houses and a few owned ones, full of people who mostly kept to themselves and waved when they pulled their trash cans in. My next-door neighbor, Carol, 57F, is a registered nurse who works long shifts of her own and takes care of her 84-year-old mother, who lives with her and needs her rest the way only an 84-year-old can. On the other side of us is an older couple who garden and go to bed early. Down the block, there are a few families with kids, and those kids played outside the way kids do, and nobody minded because they went in when it got dark and they were just being kids. My landlord, Frank, owns our house and 2 others on the street, and he is the rare kind of landlord who actually picks up the phone. Hold on to Frank. He matters later. We all knew the rhythm of the street, and the rhythm was calm. You could sit on your porch in the evening and hear a lawnmower a few houses down or a screen door or nothing at all. And then a few months back, the house directly across from mine went up for rent, the old tenants moved out, and a new couple moved in, and the calm packed up and left with the people who used to live there. I will call them Trevor and Bree because those are not their names and because I would rather not give them their real ones. They moved in with what seemed like a rotating cast of about 100 people, although I will admit it was probably closer to 10 on any given day, plus a German Shepherd and a beat-up sedan that would become the villain of half this story. The first week, I did the thing I always do, which is assume the best. I walked over and introduced myself at the fence, told them welcome to the street, said if they needed anything to let me know. Bree smiled and said thanks. Trevor barely looked up. And I thought, okay, they are a little rough around the edges, new people settling in, a little loud. It happens. You give folks a chance. That is what neighbors do. Looking back, I gave them about 40 chances too many. The first thing that broke was the dog. Anytime Trevor and Bree left the house, which was often, they tied that poor German Shepherd up in the front yard and left him there to bark and howl for hours. And I do mean hours. The dog was not mean. The dog was lonely and bored and stuck on a rope in a yard with no water that I ever saw. And he let the whole neighborhood know exactly how he felt about it. He would start up around the time their car pulled out and he would not stop until it came back. And some days the car did not come back until well after dark. I felt awful for him. We all did. There's a particular kind of guilt you feel listening to an animal cry all day knowing it is not yours to help. One week, right after a big storm finally let up, they put him straight back out in the yard while it was still thundering, and he was scared out of his mind, howling at every crack of the sky for hours while their driveway sat empty. That was the first time I called animal control. It would not be the last. They came, they left a notice, and within a few days the dog was right back on the rope. The second thing that broke was the car. About 2 months in, Trevor decided his sad little sedan needed a giant subwoofer in the trunk, and he installed the worst-sounding one money could buy. I want you to understand what this was actually like because the word noise does not cover it. It was not music. It was a low, ugly, rattling bass that you did not hear so much as feel in your chest and in your teeth. A thudding that came across the street and through my walls and into my actual bed. It shook my drywall. It rattled the picture frames on my shelves until I started laying them flat. And the worst part was that he was not even going anywhere. Sometimes Trevor would just sit out in his driveway, engine off, going nowhere at all, blasting it for an hour at a time like it was a hobby, like the whole point was for the rest of us to have to hear it. I would lie there at 9 at night with a 4:30 alarm waiting for me, feeling my mattress hum underneath me, and I would just stare at the ceiling and wonder what exactly I had done to deserve this. The third thing that broke was the nights. There were always kids over at that house, and during the day that was fine, kids play, who cares? But these kids were out in the middle of the street screaming well past 10 at night, which in our city is the cutoff for the noise ordinance, screaming like they were getting paid by the decibel, long after every working adult on that block needed to be asleep. And nobody over there ever came out to bring them in. The adults were usually the ones making the most noise anyway, sitting in the driveway, music going, talking at a volume that carried into every bedroom on the street. It was not the kids' fault. Kids do what they are allowed to do. It was that nobody was ever parenting them, and the rest of us were the ones paying for it at 4:30 in the morning. Now let me tell you what all of that does to a person, because this is the part I really need you to feel. I drive a bus. I am responsible for a vehicle full of strangers for 12 hours at a stretch, starting before the sun comes up, in traffic, in the dark, in the rain. That job does not work on 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and 2 or 3 hours of sleep was what I was getting, night after night, for weeks that turned into months. By the end of one of those weeks, I was so foggy at work that I caught myself making the kind of small mistakes you cannot afford to make when you have 40 people behind you. I drifted on, a stop. I braked later than I should have once. Hard enough that a passenger grabbed the rail and gave me a look. I sat through a green light because my brain had simply stopped for a second. My supervisor pulled me aside, not angry, just concerned, and asked if everything was okay. And I had to sit there and say that my neighbors were keeping me up at night, which sounds like the smallest complaint in the world until it is the reason your hands are not steady on a wheel. That was the moment this stopped being an annoyance for me and became something that could actually get somebody hurt, and it scared me more than the bass ever did. And here's the thing. We tried the nice way first. We tried it over and over and over. I went over and asked, politely more than once. Carol asked on behalf of herself and her mother, who was getting woken up too. The garden couple asked. Other neighbors asked. There was even one evening where I caught Trevor in a decent mood, leaning on his car in the driveway, and I really leveled with him. I told him about the 4:30 alarms and the 12-hour shifts and the mistakes at work. Told him I was not trying to be difficult, that I just needed to sleep, and he nodded along and said he got it, man. He totally got it, and he even apologized. And for about 2 days, he did get it. The street was quiet. I slept. I started to think maybe it had landed. Then the bass came back, louder than before. Like the conversation had never happened. Like my asking had only reminded him that he could. So we called the non-emergency police line. We called animal control, several times each. I had never in my life been the person who calls the city on a neighbor, and suddenly I knew the dispatcher's voice. And it worked, a little. Every single time we called, we bought ourselves about 2 glorious weeks of peace. The officer would roll by, have a word, and for 2 weeks the street would breathe. And every single time, at the end of those 2 weeks, they came roaring back louder than before, like the quiet had only been them reloading. I started to dread the 14th day. I would lie there counting, knowing the peace had an expiration date. The breaking point came on a Monday. Of course it was a Monday. It was 10:30 at night, on a Monday, with my alarm 6 hours away, and Trevor pulled into his driveway and announced his return to the world by cranking that subwoofer to a volume I did not know a car could survive. My whole house started humming. The water in the glass on my nightstand had little rings moving across it, and something in me that had been stretched thin for months just snapped clean through. I got out of bed, I went out onto my porch in my pajamas, and I yelled at them to knock it off. And I will own that part. I yelled first, after months of asking nicely and getting nowhere. I lost my temper and I raised my voice. And do you know what I got back? Trevor told me to shut my mouth. Bree, leaning out the door, chimed in to inform me that the noise was not on purpose, as if the giant subwoofer had crawled into the trunk by itself and his foot had slipped onto the volume for the 600th time. Not on purpose. And then Trevor puffed himself up and called me a name so vile I'm not going to repeat it here. A name no man should ever scream at a woman hollered across a quiet street for the whole block to hear, with kids standing right there. I went back inside, shaking. Not even from fear, just from the pure, helpless anger of it. I had asked nicely for months. I had called the city. I had lost my sleep and very nearly my job. And somehow I was the bad guy for finally raising my voice once. While the man who shook my house at 10:30 on a Monday got to call me names in front of children and walk back inside like the king of the block. Eli was up by then, standing in the hallway in his shorts, and he was furious in the quiet way he gets, where he goes very still and very calm. He said he was going to go over there right then and have a word man to man, and I could see he meant it. And the truth is, part of me wanted to let him, wanted somebody to go puff their chest right back. But I stopped him in the doorway, because I knew exactly how that ended. It ended with 2 men yelling on a lawn at 11 at night, and Trevor loving every second of it, and one of them maybe doing something that landed the wrong person in trouble. I told Eli that if we fought them their way, on their terms, we would lose, because they had nothing to lose and we had everything. He stood there a long minute, and then he nodded, and he said, "Okay, what do we do instead?" And I did not have the answer yet. But I knew it was not going to be found on that lawn. That night, lying awake again, I stopped feeling helpless and started feeling something better. I started planning, because here's what Trevor and Bree never understood. You do not beat people like that by screaming back at them, even though every cell in your body is begging you to. They want the screaming match. The screaming match is a fair fight to them. 2 neighbors yelling, "No winner, nothing changes," and they have a lot more practice at it than you do. What people like that cannot survive is a paper trail. They cannot yell at a folder. They cannot intimidate a timestamp. It actually started with Carol. The day after the Monday blow-up, she came over with 2 cups of coffee and asked me a question that changed everything. She asked if I would start saving my doorbell camera footage, every clip of the bass and the late-night noise, and the dog left out howling so we could build a real record. Her exact words were that she wanted to start compiling a file on the people sucking all the peace out of our neighborhood. And a light went on in my head so bright I almost laughed, so that became the plan. Documentation. Not a flashlight, not a scream, not a fight on the lawn. A folder. And I will be honest with you, because you have stuck with me this far. I did briefly go the petty route too, because I am only human and I was so tired. I bought myself a heavy-duty flashlight, the bright tactical kind, and the very first night the bass started up, after that I stood at my dark window and strobed at his car just to ruin his vibe a little. I am not proud of it. It felt absolutely incredible for about 90 seconds. But then I caught myself and I realized I was just handing him the fair fight he wanted, two neighbors being childish at each other in the dark, and that any camera pointed my way would make me look just as bad as him. So I put the flashlight in a kitchen drawer and I picked up something far more powerful, which was the simple habit of hitting save. Every single time it happened, I saved it. Time-stamped, dated. The bass at 9 at night with the date glowing in the corner of the screen. The kids screaming in the street at 10:40 with the clock running on the footage. The dog tied out and howling through a thunderstorm while their driveway sat empty for 6 hours straight. Carol did the same from her cameras, so did the garden couple, so did a family down the block who I barely knew before all this. Within a few weeks, the whole street was quietly building the same file, all of us aimed at the same house, and Trevor and Bree had no idea any of it was happening, because the beautiful thing about a camera is that it never yells back, and it never gets tired, and it never forgets. Then I brought it to Frank. Remember Frank, my landlord, the one who actually answers his phone? I sat down with him at my kitchen table, and I showed him the folder. Clip after clip after clip, the dates stacking up, the same ugly bass over and over, the same howling, the same midnight screaming. And Frank, to his enormous credit, did not shrug and tell me it was not his problem because the troublemakers were not even his tenants. Frank got quietly, beautifully angry on our behalf. He told me that what those clips showed was a textbook private nuisance, the kind of thing that drives property values down and makes good tenants pack up and leave, and that he was not about to let one house do that to a street he owned 3 houses on. He asked me to forward him everything. But Frank did one more thing first, and it is the reason I trust him to this day. He said footage was good, but he wanted to hear it with his own ears before he made any threats, because he never wanted to be the kind of landlord who acted on a complaint he had not checked. So a few nights later, he sat in his truck out front, around 9, just waiting, sipping a gas station coffee. And Trevor, right on schedule, came out and fired up the subwoofer in the driveway, going nowhere. And Frank sat there and felt his own truck windows buzz from across the street. He came and knocked on my door afterward, and I have never seen a calm man look so done. He just said, "I heard it, I felt it in the dash, and I have heard enough." Then Frank did the thing that turned the whole tide. He found out who actually owned the house across the street, the landlord, renting to Trevor and Bree, and he picked up the phone. This is the part the storytellers call the reckoning, and I wish I could tell you it was a big screaming public showdown on the lawn. But the truth is so much better, because it was quiet, and it was patient, and it was final. Frank called the other landlord and laid it all out plainly, the way only a man with a full folder can. He said he had time-stamped video evidence gathered by multiple separate households of repeated noise ordinance violations, that there were animal neglect complaints already on file with the city, and that there was a long-documented pattern of disturbance with dates and times. He said he was fully prepared to bring a private nuisance suit and to bring every neighbor on the block in as a witness, and that the simplest way for the other landlord to make all of that disappear was to get his tenants to comply or to push them out. He said it without raising his voice. He did not have to. He just had the file, and the file did the talking for him. And the other landlord, who it turned out had been getting his own steady earful of complaints and his own growing pile of city notices, folded almost right away. He did not want a lawsuit. He did not want a record following his property around. As it happened, he had been losing his own patience with Trevor and Bree for a while, because they were behind on a good deal more than just being decent neighbors, if you take my meaning. And Frank's call gave him exactly the push he had been looking for. Now here's where I learned something about people like Trevor and Bree, which is that the second the consequences become real, they reach straight for the one role they had skipped the entire time, which is the victim. The first comeback attempt was Trevor marching across the street to his own landlord and trying to argue that we were the problem, that we were harassing his family, that we were the ones causing all the trouble on the block. The landlord, reasonably enough, asked him for his evidence. Trevor had none. He had his word and his outrage and nothing else. We had a folder, 6 months thick. That round ended fast. The second comeback attempt was a relapse, pure spite. The week after the warning, the bass came back one night louder than ever. A last defiant blast meant to prove to the whole street that he could not be told what to do by anyone. The old me would have gone for the flashlight or the porch. The new me did not yell and did not flinch. I walked to my window, hit save on the clip, and emailed it straight to Frank with the date right there in the subject line and went back to bed. That clip went into the file, and the file went to the other landlord, and that, I found out later, was the exact clip that turned a warning into a written ultimatum. The third comeback attempt was Bree, who cornered Carol at the mailboxes and tried the guilt angle, going on and on about how they had nowhere else to go and how cruel all of us were for trying to get a whole family thrown out into the street. And Carol, who spends her days taking care of an 84-year-old woman and 6 strangers and has precisely 0 patience left for nonsense by sundown, told her plainly that nobody was throwing anybody anywhere, that they were doing this entirely to themselves, 1:10:30, Monday at a time, and that she might have thought about having nowhere to go before she taught her kids it was fine to scream in the street at midnight. Then Carol picked up her mail and walked inside without another word. That round ended fast, too. The fourth and final comeback attempt was the pettiest, and somehow the most satisfying to ignore. One afternoon, I came home from a shift to find a note shoved in my door. No name on it, just a few angry lines about minding my own business and how some people thought they were better than everyone else. I knew exactly who it was from. I did not write back. I did not march across the street. I took a photo of it, because of course I did, and I dropped it in the folder with everything else, and I went inside and made dinner. You cannot win a fight with someone who simply will not show up to it. By then, the whole block had stopped tiptoeing around them, and people started saying out loud what they had only been saying in the group text for months. The garden couple told me at the fence that they had very nearly moved before all this started, that they had actually looked at listings, and that the folder was the first time they had felt like the street was on their side, instead of just suffering separately. Frank told me, and I will never forget this, that I had done more to protect his property in 6 weeks than any lease he had ever written. Carol and I, who had barely known each other beyond a wave before, had become genuine friends out of the whole mess. Even the city did its part. The last noise citation we reported actually stuck, with a real fine attached this time because, for once, there was time-stamped footage backing every word of the complaint, and a complaint with proof behind it is a very different animal than a complaint without it. The family down the block, the ones I barely knew, dropped off a card that just said, "Thank you for not letting it go." I keep that card. For the first time in 6 months, the people who had been losing sleep were the ones who could finally breathe again, and the house that had run the circus was the one staring down a deadline. And that brings us back to the moving truck. It took a few more weeks, but the ultimatum from their landlord was real, and it was in writing. And they did not meet it, because people who believe the rules do not apply to them rarely figure out otherwise, until it is far too late. The notice went up. The date came, and on a bright, ordinary, beautiful morning, the truck pulled up across the street and the loudest chapter of my life packed itself into a box and drove away for good. I told you the block came out to watch, and we did. Carol brought the coffee. Nobody gloated, honestly, because we were all just too tired and too relieved to have anything left over for gloating. We mostly just stood there in the quiet, listening to how quiet it actually was. No bass, no howling, no screaming at 10:40 on a Monday. Just a normal street on a normal morning, the boring kind of street you never think about until somebody takes it from you and you have to fight to get it back. The dog, I am very glad to say, did not go with them. A cousin of theirs who had been coming around took him in, and the few times I have seen that German shepherd since, he is off the rope, in a real yard, getting walked on a leash, looking like a dog who finally gets to be a dog. I am not too proud to tell you that one detail did more for my peace than the silence did. Here's what I keep coming back to now, lying in my bed that does not vibrate anymore, getting my full night of sleep before the 4:30 alarm. For a long time, I thought being a good neighbor meant putting up with whatever got thrown at me, that the polite thing, the bigger person thing, was to keep absorbing it and asking nicely and absorbing some more. And being polite is good. Asking nicely is the right first move, and you should always try it, every time. But you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep a stranger warm. And you are not required to give up your sleep and your safety and your sanity so that someone who never thinks about anyone but himself can blast his bass in peace. Quiet is not too much to ask for. It is the baseline. It is the deal. And the way you get it back is not by screaming louder than the loud people, because you will never out-yell a man with a subwoofer and nothing to lose. The way you get it back is by staying calm, writing it all down, finding the people who are on your side, and letting the truth pile up until it is simply too heavy for anyone to argue with. I got my street back, I got my sleep back, and the best part is I never once had to become them to do it. Update 1, about 2 weeks after they left. The house across the street is still empty, and I have never in my life enjoyed an empty house so much. Frank told me the owner is being a lot pickier about who he rents to next, which is fine by every single one of us. Carol and I have a new Saturday tradition now of having coffee out on the curb in the morning, just because we finally can, just because we can actually hear each other talk out there. Update 2, about a month on, we got new neighbors across the road at last, a quiet older couple who keep to themselves and wave when they pull their cans in. The first night they moved in, I will admit I held my breath a little, lying there waiting for a subwoofer that never came. A couple of days later, the man came over to introduce himself and apologized in advance in case their moving boxes piled by the curb were an eyesore for a few days. I almost hugged him on the spot. Boxes. The man was worried about cardboard boxes. I told him to take all the time in the world. Update 3, and this is the last one. I ran into Trevor exactly once at a gas station clear across town weeks after they were gone. He saw me, and for half a second my whole body braced for it out of pure habit. But there was no base to hide behind out there and no quiet street to perform for, just a tired-looking guy at a pump who could not hold eye contact with a bus driver he used to scream at from his driveway. He looked away and got in his car. And I noticed one thing, almost without meaning to, as he pulled out. The subwoofer was gone from the trunk. I guess somewhere new somebody had already told him no.